Hello, everyone. How are y'all doing today? Are you ready to enter the metaverse? Excellent. Fantastic. All right, let's pull up some slides here. Thanks for the love. Okay, so the session you're at today is called Welcome to the Metaverse, the future of hybrid everything. Of course, we're talking a lot about hybrid. Let's get into that. As I mentioned, I'm the director of the Emerging Media Lab, where we look at the future of communication, collaboration, and human connection. And one of the areas that we've looked at quite a bit in the last 5 years since the lab started is virtual reality. And of course, we've been looking at virtual reality and augmented reality through the lens of science fiction for many decades now. But like many things that were once science fiction, these are now becoming practical realities that we're engaging with every day. So this term, the metaverse, what is it? I want to invite you to use the share a thought bubble here. Tell me what you think the metaverse is. I'd like to see some options, because this is a term we're hearing a lot in the media right now. If you can type into the share a thought, or have I stumped the audience? Maybe you're writing in the chat. Let me open that as a embodied internet, Second Life, social VR, a place that's purely digital, meta what? Alternative universe where nothing is impossible, digital world where we can build relationships, collective digital worlds, extended reality, digital layers on the real world, digital counterpart, Zuck wants to own it, digital universe beyond the internet, all platforms of engagement. Integration of mirror worlds, yeah, this is great. Building the imagination, thank you, Lonnie, you're doing that definitely in Afterville. Fantastic. So clearly, there's a lot of different ideas of what the metaverse is, and that makes sense because it's a whole meta universe. Looks like you didn't stop the audience. I tried. I will, but just wait. Okay, so like I said, this term, the metaverse, you've probably seen this a lot right now. Why the metaverse is going to change everything. So let's try to figure out what that is. You may have even seen that Mark Zuckerberg has announced that he's going to transform, that Facebook is no longer a social media company. It's actually a metaverse company. And of course, they own Oculus, the largest VR company, so that makes sense. Most recently, they've introduced things like Facebook Horizon, which is their social VR platform for just regular citizens. And then just a couple of weeks ago, they launched a beta version of their workrooms for enterprise collaboration. Now, IFTF has actually been thinking about the metaverse for a long time. This is a report that actually you can download. If you could put that link into the chat. This is a report from 2009 where we were referring to it as blended reality. It's always interesting to look back at our forecasts and see what we were thinking about at that time. And these terms, cyberspace, that was introduced again by kind of speculative fiction by William Gibson in 1984. And the term metaverse actually was first coined by Neal Stephenson in 1992. More recently, we've heard the term oasis in Ready Player One, the book and the movie. But another book came out in 1992, and it was very, very formative for me. I read it. It was a year after I graduated high school. I decided I knew I wanted to be in media, and I got into 5 film schools, and I went and visited all of them, and not a single one of them had a computer. And I realized, okay, I'm not paying $100,000, $200,000 to learn how to literally cut film together. And so I decided to just go out and learn. I knew what I wanted to be, but it didn't exist yet. So I started to learn about things that kind of led me to the career I have now. And the formative book was this book, Virtual Reality, by the IFTF Distinguished Fellow, Howard Rheingold. And this is the first book that introduced me to the concept of virtual reality. And what was so beautiful about it was that it wasn't just talking about the technology. Howard is, a mentor and icon for me, and he really talked not just about the technology, but how this is going to change how we collaborate and communicate and connect, and what were the social behaviors coming out in these spaces. If you haven't read this book, it's really a really beautiful book. So, right, yeah, Sean read it as well. Okay, so to talk about the metaverse, we've invited another individual who's been thinking about VR and AR and XR for many, many years, Avi Bar-Zeev. You can read his LinkedIn, and it's quite long. And I highly recommend subscribing to his Medium page if you really want to try to understand not just what these technologies are, but what they mean. Avi's done a lot of things over his career. Some things you might have heard of, helped innovate something called Google Earth, Second Life. He also helped invent this, which was the first commercial AR headset, the HoloLens. I'll get a little meta here. You could definitely say that Avi is an XR OG. So with that, I'd like to invite Avi actually up to the stage. Let me see if I can get him here. Let's give him a warm. Avi, am I wearing this right?
Yeah, it's perfect for your third eye.
Okay, yeah. I've actually retired this. Sorry for my new Facebook goggles. I'm gonna just surveil you for a second.
Oh, are you filming this whole thing now?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you can tell.
There you go.
That's my indicator. Okay, well, welcome, Avi. First of all, let's talk about the metaverse. Obviously, it means a lot of different things to a lot of people. Tell me what you think it means, and what are some of the kind of ways you think that we should be thinking about it.
Sure. I mean, I can remember back to the Metaverse Roadmap where there were at least 5 different definitions of it, and your colleague Mike Liebold had one of them. And for me, honestly, though, the older definitions are the ones that hold. I'm okay with redefining words, but I'm a little uncomfortable with some of the extensive ways this word has been redefined, just mainly because in a couple of ways, the new definitions are the opposite of the old, right? So originally, it was a place to escape from reality where we didn't even want to use our real names or else we might get killed in real life. And then it became a place to bring the virtual world into reality, which is pretty much the opposite. And now there's even a third major definition, which is the opposite of that, because now it's no longer the centralized place, but now with the fusion of that in Web3, it's turning into this idea that everything will be decentralized and we can finally overthrow some of our overlords for a more democratic form. And I think it's certainly possible, but maybe a little bit naive that people will give up control so much. But it's come to mean not just this virtual world that we go to, but the interaction with everyday things, including Internet of Things. The part that I care about the most is really the AR part, because I've spent the last 12 years focusing more on AR than anything else. And I do have some concerns with the way people are throwing around the word. I think we have to be a little more careful about using it. And some people have tried to fix that by coming up with other words, like one I don't like too much is the metaverse, which makes it sound like you have a speech impediment, but it's trying to say metaverse plus virtual earth together. I think it's not quite working, but people are trying to help distinguish these things. It's turning a little bit into a sort of Smurf language where metaverse kind of means anything to anybody, and that's a bit dangerous. We've seen that with other words, and I think we have to be a little more crisp.
So I know there's some concerns, but before we get into those, let's talk about, so why now, right? VR has been around for a long time. Why suddenly is everybody talking about the metaverse?
Well, there were almost nobody talking about it in March, and then around the end of March and April, lots of rich and famous people started talking about it. And you had, as you I think mentioned before, Facebook saying they're going to be a metaverse company, and you had the IPO of Roblox for a lot of money. And you have Epic now, which makes the Unreal Engine one of the 2 major engines that people use, also saying they want to build a metaverse. And you had a VC creating a fund to try to make money off of the concept of the metaverse. It just seemed like everybody, by this summer, everybody had to say what their position was relative to the metaverse because everybody else was. I think some of the people using the word are not quite comfortable with it yet. They just don't want to be left out. For example, John Hanke from Niantic, I think, was trying to qualify and say it's a real world metaverse. The metaverse is dystopian, but the thing we're using is a real world metaverse, so that's good. And I think he would much prefer to have a better word for what he's doing. But if people think they understand it, it's really tempting to use it as a shorthand for something.
Yeah, and actually, Suzanne, if you could post into the chat Avi's Medium page, because you had a really great article the other day, just talking through all the possible verses and all the different terms, including metaverse, I think. Did you have metaverse? or meat person.
Yeah. Yes, the metaverse is a vegetarian or vegan world, which is not compatible with the reality lasagna, which is what we're calling that picture. Whenever you see layers of reality, that's the reality lasagna. So you have to kind of either do a veggie lasagna or pick one of the two.
So let's talk about the concerns. You mentioned that. I mean, it's exciting, right? I mean, we're going to, and part of what, we're going to be doing today and throughout this week is trying to explore, like, what's exciting about the metaverse? How can this be fun? How can this be used for futures? How can this be, and even just looking back at, let's say, how Rheingold's work, right? And a lot of the work at IFTF, looking at the internet, it's like, we were very excited. We're all going to be connected and collaborating and together. But there were some sides of this we didn't anticipate. So tell us what are some of those concerns that you're thinking about right now as we go through this next paradigm shift?
Sure. I think the biggest concern I have is privacy. And so, the broadest definition of the metaverse is just the next internet. It's the next iteration of everything we already know, but it's more embodied. People are there, not just the artifacts of people, but the people themselves in some form are actually there to interact with. And that's great. But the more we introduce the people back in, the more we also have privacy concerns. And so we've seen this with the evolution of the web. The security wasn't really taken as seriously as it should have been. And people have exploited all the loopholes to be able to track us and build profiles about us that we don't control. And the danger is at least 10x with the metaverse, because I'll give you just a scenario to help explain this. So let's say this is the AR side of things, but this also applies to a very dense VR world as well. There's more stuff than I can possibly see. There are more things. If I were to see them all at once, we would go nuts, and we would, it would start to approach or even exceed the old hyper reality video that Keiichi Matsuda made that shows how bad it can get. But it would be even worse, right? Because everything would be visible all the time. So we need a way to filter that. Well, how are we going to filter? The best way I know is to use our personal context. So to use the fact that we're outside on the street, it's lunchtime, the system will know that and show us lunch restaurants. But to know that, it needs to know a lot about us. And who's going to control that information? And so I think the thing that I'm looking to see is more that the next generation of experiences are regulated by our personal devices, which have much more security on them than even our phones today. And they go out and find content for us from the greater universe or metaverse or whatever you want to call it. But the content that we see is really controlled by our personal context. And the danger there is that anybody listening to that conversation about what do we want to get is going to know what we're interested in, know where we are, know what we're looking at. And, we need to make sure that's a totally private transaction. And that I don't see in all the discussions of the metaverse so far. The argument that I get into people the most is, yeah, you want to connect all the virtual worlds, but how are you going to make sure they don't just all flow into each other and our entire inner life is exposed to the network again? And in a way, it's much worse. So that's why I like to separate AR just for the sake of its own integrity. But I do believe that we will, be pulling content from some sort of spatialized future internet. That seems like a given. But I think the other issue is, are we really going to go and try to stitch a 3D space together? Some people really want that. And, in 1992, I wanted that too. I really believed in building this literal figurative copy of the world. And I've worked a lot on that. But I also think it's a little silly, because do we really want to be restricted to having to go walk through a virtual space that's 10x bigger than the real world? We barely walk in the real world. And Second Life went through this. They had to add flying and then teleporters because people just didn't want to deal with the vastness of the space. Are we going to stick with those metaphors, or are we going to find new and better ones to deal with the greater complexity of the information that we're creating here?
Yeah, and as we know, like, new media formats always imitate the old initially, right? So it's like, okay, let's recreate the world rather than, okay, no, actually, what is this really for, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to walk around cyberspace necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, there's one good reason for it is if you just want to go through a stroll through random discovery, fine, but mostly no, we don't want to probably recreate the limits of the real
world. Okay, so let's say we're able to navigate that future. What's the upsides? Like what are some of the things that you think could be really wonderful about this kind of multi-layered connected presence and information and all of this?
The ultimate goal of augmented reality is both to augment ourselves, so we can call it more, augmented people or augmented humans, as my friend titled her book, Helen Papagiannis. But the other thing we're trying to do is to make the world a better place, right? I think that the real purpose of AR is not for all the ephemeral stuff, but it's to see the world through new eyes so that we understand it better, and to see other people through new eyes so that we understand each other better. You know, all these technologies are fundamentally communications technologies. They're all there to help bridge the gap between minds that don't necessarily speak the same language or use the same metaphors or have the same understanding. And so as a communication medium, the goal is to take what's in your head, make it tangible so that I can see it and have the same understanding that you had. And that level of communication and understanding goes way beyond a Zoom call or anything that we're dealing with today. It goes into truly trying to create, you know, something closer to a mind meld between people, so that we're understood. We speak, we're understood, we're appreciated, and you know, how many of the world's problems are due simply to people just not understanding each other, right? If we can just improve that, we can make the world a much better place.
Absolutely. Well, so Avi, since this is the 10-year forecast and you've literally been building the future, give us your brief 10-year forecast on the metaverse.
Yeah, I do think it's actually going to take the whole 10 years to get to where people are talking about today. And I, you know, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I have been working on this for a long time. And AR has been in progress for my entire life, right? 1965, 1968 is when I was born. And that was probably the first true AR demo. And it's taken this long to get to hopefully something that's as small and light as a pair of glasses or better. Over the next 5 years, we're going to see the hardware improve dramatically. Right now, the hardware is not really good enough, especially in VR. It's good enough for games, but it's not good enough to wear all day long. There are only a small subset of the population can actually do that. But within 5 years, we should have good enough hardware that we could wear it all day long if we wanted to. And the goal for the lightweight AR glasses is that all day long means like 18 hours. It means you need to get, you know, as much life out of it as you get out of your cell phones today. And you can imagine how hard of a problem that is, because that kind of thing, you know, takes a lot of power, a lot of battery. We're going to need new ways to solve this, but give that 5 years before we have some good solutions. And I think by 10 years, we're going to see kind of like what we saw with smartphone adoption, where it wasn't that the iPhone invented smartphones, right? They existed before in some form. And it wasn't even that the iPhone 1, which wasn't even called that, was the device that everybody got. It took maybe until the iPhone 4 before you started seeing an inflection point, before everybody, you know, this mental place in the curve happens when we all say, okay, this is the future, I'll jump on. And even the reluctant people start to go say, okay, I guess I do need to buy a smartphone now. That is going to take the full 10 years, even though we won't even have devices that we really love for maybe, you know, 5. It's going to take 10 just to ramp till we get to the hopefully billion mark with these devices. And it could take longer depending on the adoption, depending on privacy, depending on whether we can really find the right experiences for people that are what they want and need, and not just force, you know, recreations of the old models on them. The argument is, if I could already do it on my cell phone, why do I need glasses? Why do I need to upgrade to something more expensive? And so we have to answer that question: what is new and different and better, as to why people are going to decide to give up their prime real estate on their face for something technological?
Yeah. Well, I'm seeing a lot of just comments in the chat here just about incentives, and that could be a whole other day long. That could be a whole conference, actually, because I think that's actually in some ways the big question, not just about XR, but about all of these technologies that are emerging. What are the incentive structures? Who's owning these systems? Where is this data going? All those questions. But I want to thank you, Avi, for joining us today. It's a real honor to have you on our virtual stage. Can we give Avi a big round of applause?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Avi Bar-Zeev. You should, if you want to learn more about his thoughts, please check him out on Medium.